hello once again. How you doing out there? Hope you're doing good. Welcome to my little series that I've been calling Crime Dive. My name is, of course, Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you can't help but be drawn to true crime cases. Human behavior and human nature is just wild and fascinating, man. If you are also drawn to true crime, and want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every other Tuesday while I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. So yeah, how are you guys doing out there? I certainly hope that you're taking care of yourself out there. It's tough, so I hope you're doing whatever you have to take care of yourself. I am officially in my third trimester, and I'm so excited. I just gotta share, I'm so excited. I do not have gestational diabetes. Woo! Did y'all know that? I did not know that before getting pregnant, that women can get diabetes from pregnancy, gestational diabetes. What the fuck, man? What the fuck? As if pregnancy isn't hard enough. Like, what? But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to share that. I'm super happy and proud of myself. I've been eating super well and all that. So yeah, super happy. Also, just want to give a shout out to some family. I got to go spend some time this past weekend with some family that I haven't seen in literally like 20 years. So shout out to my Aunt June and Uncle Richard and my cousin Misty. Everyone has that one family member, right? Where you're like, all right, I'm part of this family. I was not switched at birth, you know? So shout out to my cousin Misty, my favorite family member. And shout out to my grandma and grandpa. We call them Nanny and Papa in my family. My grandma will be 95 this year, guys. 95, and she's still going strong, man. Like, she has to use a walker. I think because it was like her hip or legs or something, but like, she's still going strong, man, like active and all that. So yeah, props. Alrighty, so enough of that. Let's get into today's case. Today's case was originally going to be a crime dip story because I didn't really find a whole lot of information initially. But that was because I was searching the victim's name. But when I searched the perpetrator's name, a whole bunch of information came out and it kind of turned into a crime dive. Today, we are going to talk about the cold case murder of Jeanie Childs that took nearly 30 years, guys, to solve. Yeah, it is wild. It's pretty amazing how they end up catching the murderer. Like, technology is wild. I do know, right, with DNA technology, there have been some convictions overturned, right, because I think it's like a myriad of reasons, right? Either like the DNA analysis didn't do it right, or maybe like the DNA was corrupted or something like that. But I don't think this will be one of them. And just forewarning, yeah, there's some cussing. I tend to slip an F-bomb in there or two, but there will also be photos of the crime scene with just kind of like blood on the wall and bloody footprints. Some people get a little squeamish about that, so just wanted to forewarn you. And with that, yeah, let's begin this case, and we will start, of course, with Miss Jeanie Childs, our victim. All right, so Jeanie Childs was actually born Jeanie Jean Ann Ekman, and she was born on April 21st, 1958, to Betty Gertrude and Eugene Ekman. I'm not sure of the details, but eventually Betty and Eugene would divorce, and Betty would remarry Jeanie's stepfather, and they had a child, Jeanie's younger half-sister, and they named her Cindy. Now, Jeanie and Cindy were primarily raised in Isanti, Minnesota. However, it's really sad, dude. This is really sad. Jeanie's life kind of took a really dark turn very early on in her life, around about 12 years old or so. And that was because in 1971, so she's approximately 12 years old, Jeanie's stepfather was murdered by his business partner / brother-in-law. And apparently this loss, really hit Jeanie hard. I don't have any details on how close she was to her stepfather, but he must have been maybe like a father to her, because I have no idea about her biological father. But yeah, this loss hit her real hard. So hard, in fact, that Jeanie dropped out of school in the 6th grade and frequently ran away from home. Yeah, that's how bad this this loss of her stepfather hit her. Isn't that awful? At 12, man. Betty said her daughter, quote, went off the deep end in her teens due to this loss. And yeah, like I said, she would frequently run away from home. And when she was in her late teens, don't know the exact age, but late teens, Jeanie pretty much left home for good. And she ended up bouncing from place to place, mainly in Minneapolis, although she did still keep in contact with her mother. So it's not like she ran away and cut off her family. She just, I guess, wanted to go be on her own. But it is suspected that she may have gotten involved with drugs at some point. Betty said, quote, I didn't know anything about drugs. I was not suspicious for many, many years. And like I just said, Betty would still see her daughter, and she said that she saw her regularly, but, quote, I lose what was going on with her. You know, probably just, her daughter's not living under a roof anymore, and once she hits 18, right, like, what are you gonna do? So yeah, already, dude, Jeanie had a really, really rough start to life. Now, at the time of the events of today's case that we'll be discussing, Jeanie was legally married to a man named Al Childs. And Al had 3 children from a previous relationship, and Jeanie changed her name to Childs, so she was known as Jeanie Childs. Now, Betty said that her daughter had a hysterectomy at some point, so she was unable to have children. So when she got with Al, who, had kids, she said she was, quote, very happy she could have other children. It is said Jeanie absolutely adored children, loved the elderly, doted on them, and it is said even after Jeanie and Al separated, so like I said, they were still legally married at the time of the events of today's case, but they seemed like maybe they were just separated. But even after separating from Al, it is said Jeanie still kept in touch with her stepchildren and was in their lives actively. She just really, really loved children and always wanted to be a mom. Now, at the time of today's case, Jeanie ended up living with a boyfriend named Arthur Gray, and they lived in the Horn Towers complex on the 21st floor, and this was located in South Minneapolis, and it was a public housing complex. And unfortunately, I don't know the exact details of how it started, if Arthur maybe pressured her or if she was doing it before, but Jeanie would end up being a sex worker, which honestly, like, I have no problem. I mean, sex work is work, right? It's all work. And if you think about it, we all kind of prostitute ourselves every day for work, right? But, as is unfortunately so often the case, some women get, kind of forced into it, coerced. I don't have any details on that. But Jeanie was a sex worker, and she primarily used the apartment her and Arthur had for her work. And apparently the Horn Towers that she and Arthur lived in, it was known for sex work activity. Additionally, Arthur was also Jeanie's pimp. Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that I'm not sure if he coerced her into it, if she had done it before. I don't have any details of that. All we know is that when this case takes place, Jeanie was working as a sex worker and Arthur was her pimp. And yeah, that's why I said in the intro this was originally going to be a crime dip, because originally I couldn't find a whole lot of information. And that's really all I could find out about Jeanie. So let's get to the event. On Sunday, June 13th, 1993, Jeanie, who was only 35 years old, was found in her apartment complex dead. She was found around 6:45 p.m., and how she was discovered was earlier that evening, right? Another tenant who I believe was on the same floor as Jeanie, the 21st floor, had called in and was like, hey dude, there's like water coming into my apartment. And so the building security guard, Corey Busker, along with his partner and the apartment caretaker, went to the floor to investigate, right? And so yeah, they saw that they were right, that the neighbor, the resident who had called in the complaint, they're like, wow, there's water on the floor. And so they traced the water to its source, and it was coming from Jeanie's apartment. Now they knocked on the door, and after receiving no answer, the 3 men entered the apartment, and they saw right off the bat from just like opening the door, there was water and blood everywhere. Yeah, and they immediately, stepped out and they called the supervisors. And when the supervisors entered the apartment, they discovered there was a brutal, brutal crime scene. There was blood all throughout Jeanie's apartment. There was blood all over her bedroom, the living room, bathroom. Things were scattered everywhere. Like clearly there was some sort of violent, bloody struggle that had occurred. When they went into the bathroom to see, because that's where the water was coming from, that is when they found Jeanie's body dead in the shower. The shower was running. She was soaked in blood, and she was only wearing her socks. Now, that is what the very initial news report stated. Later news reports stated that Jeannie's body was actually found in her bedroom. Specifically, she was found wedged between the dresser and the foot of her bed. And I guess the shower was just left running. She was not found in the shower. But earlier reports stated that she was, so that's why I mentioned it. But either way, right, that is when authorities were, of course, called. So when police got to the Horns Tower building, they, of course, secured the crime scene, locked it down, and an autopsy would later reveal that poor Jeanie had been stabbed about 65 times. 65 times. And most of the really bad wounds were all along her torso and neck. And, quote, a number of wounds were inflicted after she died. So clearly, right, a lot of anger, a lot of violence in this killing. One of the dozens of wounds that she received was in her abdomen. And one actually caused, a large defect in it to the point that she was, nearly disemboweled. Yeah. However, there was no bleeding from this wound, is what the autopsy found, suggesting that Jeanie was already dead when she received this wound, or she was close to death, to the point that there was, no blood pressure. Yeah, isn't that brutal? One of the stab wounds even broke her breastbone and destroyed her heart. Yeah, can you imagine bone and muscle and tissue and all that? That's hard to get through. And someone stabbed her right through all of that, and it penetrated her heart and destroyed it. My God. Additionally, she received 17 additional superficial cuts to her abdomen, 7 superficial cuts to her neck, and she had other stab wounds all over her chest, her back, her arms, her hands, and her buttocks. Yeah, this was a brutal violent crime. And by looking at the crime scene, right, investigators could tell that, that there was a violent struggle. Jeanie did not just, get stabbed and then die. We said this earlier, there was stuff scattered all throughout, so clearly there was a struggle that had gone on throughout her whole apartment. Her bedroom window was left wide open, and the screen was also, punched out, so they assumed maybe the killer escaped through there. The only room in the apartment that seemed completely untouched was the kitchen, which other than some, a few dirty dishes in the sink, the kitchen was, immaculate. So when, police are coming to the crime scene. There, of course, right? Lots of evidence. There's lots of blood. It's a bloody, messy struggle. So there was lots of evidence to collect. They collected her comforter, which was covered in blood. And as they'll discover later, there was I think 4 different kinds of semen on there, which, right, when you consider she used her apartment for her sex work, wasn't too suspicious on that, but we will get to the sperm cells that they found on the comforter later. They also collected several bloody items, mainly from the bathroom, and that included a blue towel, a washcloth, a red t-shirt that was found on the toilet seat because the toilet seat was down. There were also some bloody spots found in the bathroom sink, and when they lifted the toilet seat, Jeannie's purple underwear was in the toilet. And just like the other items, covered in blood. A condom was found on Jeannie's nightstand, but due to the spermicide, there was no sperm or DNA to collect from it. Finger, palm, and footprints were also found throughout the apartment, as well as several samples of DNA. Again, considering what she used her apartment for, that wasn't too surprising, right? They additionally found more bloody bare footprints, all right? Not shoe prints, a footprint, all right? Bloody footprints next to Jeannie's body. Other reports stated that they were more near the window with the screen punched out. Now, due to the violence and the bloodiness of the scene and defensive wounds on Jeannie, I'm going to guess maybe on her hands and arms, maybe that's where she got the other cuts. Police did say, quote, the person or suspect we're looking for could possibly have been injured bad enough to seek medical attention. Police also were never able to find the murder weapon. They, since they saw the window out, they of course searched the stairwells, fire escapes, and the ground floor of the building, outside, but they never found the murder weapon. The case was then led by Hennepin County Sheriff's Office Detective Solitros, and when he was looking at the case, we can all assume who the number 1 prime suspect was right off the bat, right? Arthur Gray, Jeannie's live-in boyfriend and pimp. Not only, right, did he live in the apartment with Jeannie and was her pimp, but he had a history of being violent with Jeannie and violent with other women. The most recent case of being violent with Jeannie was like 2 weeks before her murder. So he seems like the obvious suspect, right? However, he was interviewed on June 15th, and he was cleared because he was out of state with a friend named Maurice Hampton who verified it, and they had plenty of proof to support where they were at, completely in a different state at the time, and we will hear more from Maurice later on. In September, when they still didn't have like a whole lot of clues or leads or whatever, they even had Arthur come in and submit footprints, palm prints, and fingerprints for exclusionary purposes, and he was ruled out. Now, the case almost immediately went cold, right? The media also did not really pick up the story all that much. They didn't really cover it. And some criticized the lack of coverage due to the fact that Jeannie was a sex worker. You know, there's like, oh, of course, it's a sex worker, so of course media doesn't want to pick it up, right? Police also did not really comment a whole lot to the press. And apparently around this time, 1993, Minneapolis was struggling with an increasing homicide rate, and it would apparently lead to the Murderopolis era of 1995. Yeah, I was not aware of that. So yeah, maybe there's some cases to look into from that era. But yeah, putting all these factors together, yeah, Jeannie's case was almost immediately cold. So now we're going to flash forward. Remember, I said in the beginning, this case would take almost 30 years to come to a resolution. So let's flash forward all the way to 2012. So yeah, almost 20 years later. All right. So in 2012, Minneapolis Police Department Sergeant Barbara Moe was going through the case. I think she was going through the police department's cold cases or something, but Jeannie's was a case that she was looking into. And with advancements in like DNA technology and stuff like that, she submitted several pieces of evidence from Jeannie's crime scene. And this included the blue towel that was found in the bathroom. And she submitted these pieces of evidence to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA. And thanks to, the advancements they had had in DNA technology, the BCA were able to find an unidentified DNA source on all the items. So you know how they found like multiple sperm cells on the comforter and stuff? Well, when they analyzed all those pieces of evidence, the blue towel, the blood in the sink, and all that stuff, they could see that it was one unidentified DNA source. However, that's really all they could determine at that point because there were no hits for the DNA in like CODIS or any other database. Yeah, all they could determine at that point was the same person had left DNA on all those pieces of evidence. But they didn't know who it was. So we'll jump forward a few more years to 2015. So in the spring of 2015, a detective with the Minnesota Police Department's Cold Case Task Force, Minneapolis Police Sergeant Chris Karakostis, I think that's how you say it. That was a mouthful. And an FBI special agent named Christopher J. Bokers reviewed Jeannie's case after even more advances in DNA technology had come forward, I mean, it's pretty amazing how quickly, right, the technology of like DNA advancement and stuff like that happened. Like, relatively speaking, it was in a short amount of time, right? And so with all these advancements that had happened, they were hoping maybe they could, get a hit on this DNA or find out more information, right? So in May of that year, they opened a formal case with the FBI, and in mid-July, they sent some of the samples that Sergeant Moe had sent back in 2012, including a single sperm cell that was found on the comforter. Remember, there were 4 different ones, but there was one source of DNA on all the items. Well, they sent all that to the FBI, to the BCA again, and to a private DNA company called DNA Solutions Incorporated. And like we said, this was due to the advancements in DNA technology, so they thought maybe some more information could be gleaned from this, right? And they were right. DNA Solutions Incorporated were able to develop a more comprehensive DNA sample. They were able to develop a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's known as an SNP DNA profile. Now, apparently, the information that is gleaned from an SNP profile much more comprehensive and like complex and thorough than just like a regular like DNA analysis. And apparently the information gleaned from an SNP can lead to a lot more information about the source of, the DNA. And this included physical appearance. It could identify genetic relationships and even make medical discoveries such as the source's susceptibility to medical problems. Isn't that wild? And at this point, again, Arthur Gray was ruled out because his DNA was not a match to this S&P profile that they had developed. In June of 2018, the FBI then sent over this S&P sample to several online genealogy websites, sites that I'm sure you've heard of, Ancestry.com, 23andme.com, GEDmatch.com, and MyHeritage.com. And the next month, right, so they're submitting stuff. It takes time, right, for this stuff to happen. So the next month, Agent Bokers consulted with the detectives and analysts who had worked on the Golden State Killer case. And he asked how they had gone about tracing the DNA and creating a family tree to catch the killer. So using their advice and the same techniques, on January 2nd, 2019, MyHeritage.com was able to come up with a match. Not an exact match, mind you. They were able to link the S&P profile to either a first cousin once removed or a half first cousin of the source of that DNA. The investigators then consulted a genealogist who started mapping a family tree. And obviously the family tree of the cousin, right? Going from there. And at the end, they concluded that one of two people could be the source of that S&P profile and the DNA. One of them was a 52-year-old man named Jerry Westrom. He would have been 27 years old at the time of Jeannie's murder. And the other possible source was his younger brother, Kevin Lauren Westrom. Now, both of the men were in Minneapolis at the time of Jeannie's murder. So, right, they're looking at these two guys. However, in the end, Karakostas and Bokers decided to focus on Jerry. And that was because the S&P profile said that the source would have brown eyes, and Jerry had brown eyes, whereas his brother had light hazel eyes. So they decided to focus in on Jerry as their possible suspect. Now let's get a little bit more into this Jerry guy. Who the hell is Jerry Westrom? So Jerry Arnold Westrom was born on May 16th, 1966. And I don't know who his mother is, but I know his father is Norland Westrom. And obviously he has a younger brother named Kevin. He was raised in the Elbow Lake, Minnesota area. And in 1989, he earned a bachelor's degree in agricultural business. And this was from the University of Minnesota. As I stated earlier, he was working in Minneapolis at the time of Jeannie's death. He actually lived there for 2.5 years. From April 9th, 1991 to December 31st, 1993. And he moved away from the city approximately 6 months after Jeannie's murder. Now, during his time in Minneapolis, he had numerous run-ins with law enforcement that was related to soliciting sex workers. He met his future wife, Elizabeth Ann, on May 28th, 1993, at a wedding event that for mutual friends. That's how they met. And they almost immediately started dating. At the time he met Elizabeth, Jerry told her that he was attending classes to get his EMT certification and working another job. The two were then married exactly 1 year later on May 28th, 1994. Now, throughout the years, looks like Jerry owned and operated several businesses in the Isanti and Stearns counties areas. And he ended up gaining a pretty, high local profile due to his business acumen and his support of the local youth sports, specifically hockey. He and Elizabeth had raised other two children who were grown at this time when the agents are looking into him, and had raised them in hockey. Other sources said that the Westroms actually had 3 grown children. And other sources said 2. So 2 or 3 grown children that, they had played hockey. And that was another way how Jerry kind of became a little bit known in the local community. His business acumen, and he was the hockey dad. Now, before it went dormant, Jerry had a blog. And in this blog, it stated that he had spent years as a commodity broker, quote, in the field of crop revenue management and helped craft the farm bill known as the Agricultural Act of 2014 before he turned to farming full-time. At this time, again, when Bokers and Karakostas are looking into him, he and Elizabeth had owned and operated an organic farm. At one point, Jerry also owned a gas station, and apparently to this day, it still bears the name Westrom's Corner. And when Jerry owned and operated this gas station, he mainly employed teenaged girls. And it seems that his run-ins with law enforcement did not stop in Minneapolis. He continued to have run-ins with law enforcement for multiple DWI convictions. On December 16th, 2004, he was cited for a DWI and for carrying a weapon without a permit. On September 7th, 2011, he was again cited for DWI, a third-degree DWI, and on October 10th, 2012 in Brooklyn Center, he was again cited for a DWI, a second-degree one. Yeah, his third DWI conviction, guys. Doesn't it piss you off just how lax DUIs and DWIs are thought of? Like, three. Nah, dude, after the first one, you should have heavy penalties, like losing your license or something. But like you hear about, this stuff all the time where like someone has like 6 or 7 convictions. Convictions, guys. Yeah, this was his third DWI conviction. He was also at this time charged with soliciting a sex worker, but that charge was dropped. In 2015, Jerry was arrested at a hotel in St. Cloud, and it was for agreeing to hire a sex worker. This was in Stearns County, and he admitted that he had found a solicitation for a sex worker through Backpage.com in the escort section. And he planned to pay the sex worker $100 for sex. However, the sex worker's ad had actually been placed by law enforcement, specifically by the Central Minnesota Sex Trafficking Task Force. And on February 12th, 2016, he was officially convicted for soliciting a sex worker. And he ended up getting probation on that, and he got off probation on that charge in 2018. Yeah, so, guy's looking pretty good for the suspect, right? History of soliciting sex workers and stuff. I'll get to the gas station and hiring a lot of teenage girls later. But yeah, he's looking pretty good, right? So, investigators are sitting there and kind of investigating Jerry. And they then built out a family tree of Jerry using Ancestry.com. So in January of 2019, Karakostas and Bokers started surveilling Jerry undercover, right? And this was because they wanted to discreetly obtain a DNA sample for him, right? Because they didn't have the exact match, right? They just had the S&P profile that then the genealogist, my lord, was able to map out a family tree using that S&P sample, right? And they traced it to a cousin of Jerry's. Well, they needed a sample of Jerry's DNA to do that final analysis and comparison, right? So they started following Jerry around. Now, after doing some information on Jerry, primarily using public sources like his Facebook page, they discovered that Jerry's daughter was in college at this time, and she was on the college hockey team. And they figured, well, he's a hockey dad. Surely he would go to some of his daughter's hockey games. So they got the team schedule and started going to the games in the hopes of running into Jerry at one of these games. On January 4th, they did see Jerry at one of his daughter's games, but there was no opportunity to collect any DNA from him, again, discreetly. And the same thing happened the following day at another one of his daughter's games, although Karakostas was the only one who went to this game. So they just continued surveilling Jerry, at home, at work, when he drove, typical undercover surveillance stuff. And they were hoping just to find some kind of opportunity to collect some DNA from him. Now, after surveilling Jerry for 3 weeks, on January 25th, they saw that Jerry had posted on his Facebook page that he was in the Madison, Wisconsin area for an organic conference. Probably like on organic farming, since he ran a farm with his wife. And then they consulted Jerry's daughter's hockey team schedule, and they noticed that the team had a game in Mequon, Wisconsin, which I guess was sort of like near this area. And so they figured, hey, he's in the area. Chances are he's probably going to attend his daughter's game. So Bokers decided to call some local hotels and see if he could find out if a Jerry Westrom was registered at one of the hotels. And he actually got lucky. The very first hotel that he called was the Holiday Inn Express in Brown Deer, Wisconsin. And I guess what Bokers did was he asked the front desk, oh, hey, yeah, can you page me to Jerry Westrom's room? And he said when the phone's, when they didn't say, oh, no one's here under that name or anything, they just transferred him and the phone started to ring, he immediately hung up. They then contacted the local police department to see if they could just do a drive-by to see if Jerry's vehicle was in the Holiday Inn's parking lot. And they did, and they confirmed to them that yes, he was there. So that very night, on January 25th, Bokers and Karakostas went to Brown Deer, Wisconsin, and they ended up getting there really, really early in the morning, like at 2 a.m., so technically January 26th now, right? So they get there. They book a room in the exact same hotel, and at like 6 a.m. that morning, there was like a continental breakfast, and so they went down there to see if maybe, Jerry would come, and again, if there'd be an opportunity. But that didn't really happen. It wasn't until that night at Jerry's daughter's hockey game that they finally got their opportunity. So at that hockey game in Mequon, they noticed after the first period, Jerry going to the concession stand. So they saw Jerry sit down at a table, eat his hot dog, and they saw him wipe the left side of his mouth with a napkin after he was done eating. He then tossed the napkin into like the cardboard box that the hot dog had come in and placed it in the trash can. This was the opportunity they had been waiting weeks for. So before a kid could throw his like Slurpee in the trash can, I believe it was Bokers. I can't remember if it was Bokers or Karakostas, but one of them went to the trash can and retrieved that container and the napkin, and they bagged it for evidence and all that, and then sent it to the BCA. So the BCA analyzed that napkin, and though there was like a mixture of DNA found, I don't know if maybe it touched like other pieces of trash or something, I don't know, but there was like a mixture of DNA found on the napkin, that the major male profile of DNA found on the napkin was a match to the DNA sample found on all those pieces of evidence at the crime scene. Therefore, Jerry could not be ruled out as the source of that DNA on all of those bloody items. Now, after this testing came back positive, this gave the investigators enough probable cause to arrest Jerry for Janie's murder. Hennepin County District Attorney Mike Freeman also was not too worried about proceeding with this case, because some people asked if maybe he was worried of how Jerry's DNA had been collected. But he wasn't really too worried about it, saying, quote, "When discarding something in the trash, the Supreme Court has said many times it is fair game."
The Hennepin County Attorney's Office today announces 2 different second-degree murder charges. The first against Jerry Arnold Westrom for a crime committed back in 1993. Mr. Westrom brutally and cruelly killed a woman in her apartment. This is a cold hit case. This was put together by extensive use of DNA, including the DNA that is similar, process that is similar to the Golden State case, which was a Golden State killer, in which DNA samples were sent to genealogists who helped us match them together. This was good police work to pass this kind of technique on between cops. And in order to tie everything to Mr. Westrom, they got a DNA sample when he was at a hockey game, used a napkin, threw it away, and they got enough DNA off of the napkin. Mr. Westrom is in custody. There's investigation is still going on. We're quite confident that he is the person, or we would not have charged it. And the DNA shows that only he and the victim are found in the blood samples, and that 99.99% of other individuals have been excluded. There were a number of blood samples taken in that particular case, and Mr. Westrom's blood is found on a number of different articles that were in the apartment, including the comforter, a towel, a footprint, and a number of other things. As I understand it, the other male that was found in one of the samples was not found in the other samples. So again, there's additional Y chromosome testing being done now, but we felt we had more than enough to charge, and we have done so. When you discard things in the trash, Supreme Court has often said it's fair game. And so he discarded the napkin in a container and threw it in the trash so they could get it. There's a number of Supreme Court cases that talk about somebody going into somebody's trash can behind their house. If you discard something, it's free game.
Because it's in a public place, right? And so on Monday, February 11th, 2019, after getting the okay from the DA's office, investigators finally arrest Jerry, who was 52 years old, for Jeannie's murder. They actually arrested him in Waite Park, which is a suburb of St. Cloud, and this was near his Stearns County office where he worked. Additionally, not only did they get a warrant to arrest him, they also got a warrant for a buccal swab from Jerry, which is like the cheek swab. Minneapolis police spokesman John Elder said though it took decades to, finally have someone in custody for Jeannie's murder, the police actually never gave up. Quote, Child's body was found in the bedroom of her apartment on June 13th, 1993. There's no known relationship between the individuals, and that's what makes these sort of cases so hard to solve. And through forensics and through updated technology, we're able to come back and get people placed under arrest for crimes they committed long ago. Karis Costas added, quote, I think people think you go get a tube of something and you stick it in a computer, someone's name pops up, and you throw them in jail, explaining, just why it took so long. And of course, right, as is all so common in these kinds of cases, friends, neighbors, people who knew Jerry were absolutely shocked about what he was being arrested for. They all described Jerry as a family man, a loving man, a hockey dad, and just an overall nice guy. There was one woman who actually worked at Jerry's gas station when she was 16 years old, and she was equally stunned, and she told the papers, quote, well, I never in a million years would have thought that I worked for an accused murderer when I was 16. This news makes every interaction I had with him seem even more scary. Jerry was loved by the town when I was growing up. He did the pancake breakfast for some of the high school sports, and he employed people at least 4 businesses that I can recall. She also said, get this, at the time that she worked at Jerry's gas station, remember, she's 16, Jerry would supply her and the other girls with alcohol. We all know why he only employed teenage girls, right? Now, this woman was now 31 years old, right, at the time of Jerry's arrest, and she recalled an incident she had with Jerry about 10 years prior, all right? So she was around 21 years old. That was the last time she had seen him. And she said this last interaction that she had with Jerry, he showed up at one of her friend's apartment and made inappropriate comments about her body. Norland, Jerry's father, was asked by the press, because this was a pretty, for the local area, it was kind of a biggish story, especially, I think, because of Jerry's kind of high profile in the community, because there was not a lot of information that came up under Jeannie's name. However, when I searched Jerry's name, a whole slew of information came out, right? And so the press asked Jerry's father, Norland, hey, has your son ever confided in you about anything like this? And he just said, quote, no, I never knew about it. He said he had just spoken with his daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, on Tuesday morning, and, quote, she heard about him being in jail, but didn't give me the particulars as to why his son was in jail. At a press conference, Freeman emphasized the importance of the DNA sample in this case, saying, quote, if we don't have a match, we don't have a case.
What's amazing about DNA, which is great for this whole system, you can get it out of the back of your collar. You can get it off the back of a cigarette butt or a Coke can. And by the way, for people who say, isn't this awful, we're invading privacy? We use DNA all the time to prove that the person didn't do it. Because if we don't have a match, we don't have a case. What this has done is make identification that much better. And even our friends in the public defender's office acknowledge if the DNA is properly taken and properly tested, the science is extremely good. In fact, the only time we have problems is identical twins, because they're the only ones who have exactly the same DNA. He was picked up not because hockey or a previous prostitution charge and conviction, but because his DNA matched. That's what got going, and then we got the rest of the record. Well, it's interesting because in the last paragraph of the complaint, after he agreed to talk with investigators, he said, never been at the apartment complex. I've never been in the apartment. I don't know who this person is, and I didn't have sex with her. Well, then why is his DNA all over the place? And his credibility obviously would be attacked upon that. Our focus is more limited. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt based on the facts we can prove in court. Sometimes speculation about why the person did it or why here or why then is of great interest, but it's not key to us, because our job is to pull together the facts to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. They were following him, which you can legitimately do. To my knowledge, there was nothing wrong with the surveillance that was done. and they happen to watch him go have a hot dog. And they know, as now you know, that DNA can be easily obtained from almost anything. And saliva is one of the principal ways you obtain DNA. And it's kind of ingenious that they thought about that and watched it, but I'm sure the defense attorney will try to challenge the surveillance, but as best I can tell from everything we talked to, it was totally legit within the confines of the law, and we're going to use it. It was a genealogy company that you see advertised on TV. He apparently had sent his DNA at some time. We sent them his DNA that we got at the crime scene. We had it, but DNA hadn't gone this far in 1993 when the crime was committed. And we asked for a match, and they come up with a number of things, and then there's more investigation that needs to be done. And as one of your colleagues pointed out, there were 2 suspects, but only Mr. Westrom matched on numbers of different samples taken from the place. That's why he's the person we believe done it. We had the blood samples. We take them and keep them, and there's no statute of limitation on homicides. They go on forever. And so periodically, investigators go back and look at the cold hit cases. We all learned quite a bit from the Golden State Killer. And I happen to know the DA in Ventura County, Greg Totten, well, and we've talked about this case. And I said, you know, I bet you we got some cases back home we could use this on. Well, we just found one.
Now, after he was arrested, even more DNA was collected from Jerry and sent to the BCA for analysis. And they specifically analyzed his DNA against the DNA found on that washcloth that was in Jeannie's bathroom. And this washcloth had 2 or more individuals' DNA on it. And their analysis revealed that neither Jerry nor Jeannie could be eliminated as contributors to that DNA. However, 99.993% of the general population could. Additionally, Jerry's semen matched that single sperm cell fraction that they found on the comforter, and it matched a sperm cell fraction that was also found on the towel that was in Jeannie's bathroom. His DNA could not be eliminated as the source of that, yet 99.99995% of the general population could be eliminated as the source of that sperm cell fraction and the DNA. Yeah, that's 5 nines, guys. Now, of course, right, they interrogated Jerry, which, okay, so, like, I mean, it's good, you know, catching a killer, but seriously, why do people allow themselves to be interrogated without a lawyer? Like, are you kidding me? Like, no, police pick me up. I'm like, fuck you, dude. I ain't saying shit till I have my lawyer. But Jerry agreed to be interrogated by Karis Costas and Bokers. And wait till you see the interrogation footage. It's hilarious. So, of course, right, they questioned him about Jeannie, about Minneapolis, the Horns Tower, all of that, right? Jerry denied ever knowing Jeannie, denied ever having sex with a woman in Minneapolis in 1993, denied ever entering the Horns Towers, denied ever being in Jeannie's apartment. Now, finally, when one of them asked, quote, "Does this look familiar to you at all? Have you ever been in those buildings?" And they showed, you know, a picture of the Horns building. Jerry just answered, quote, "Not that I remember, no." And of course, right, trying to give him some rope to hang himself, right? It was Karis Costas who said, quote, "Now, this was a long time ago. You sure on those answers?" And at this, kind of, Jerry stuttered a little bit. Quote, I haven't, yeah, I am.
Probably wondering what all this is about, I assume, or do you have any idea? I have no idea. Well, let's see if we can clear it up. You know, a lot of times, Jerry, believe it or not, I've had a lot of cases down here, and people come down and they're able to say, hey, you know, this is a situation, whatever, okay? Now, here's the thing. We are looking at a case that happened many years ago, okay, and your names come up in it. And sometimes there's a reasonable explanation why that is, and sometimes there's not. So we just want to talk to you a little bit about that. Is that okay with you? Yeah? Okay. All right, we want to talk to you about something. And just take a second here and relax. Have you ever been down to this area? Yeah. Down to Minneapolis? And have you ever been to this room, City Hall?
Not the joint room, no.
Okay. All right, Jerry. I'm going to to show you some pictures of this area of Minneapolis, see if you've ever been there. And just to let you know, a lot of times these cases, they have a lot of people come up in it. Sometimes we don't have, we learn something in these interviews, okay? Are you familiar with these buildings here? They're in South Minneapolis. They're called the Warren Towers.
No.
Okay, let me show you a different picture of these. Okay, you ever familiar with those? Are you familiar with Lake Street?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know where the Kmart is on Lake Street?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at this map here, you'll see that you have Kmart is right here.
Okay.
And then these are where these three buildings are, the Warren Towers. So Kmart's right here. This is Blaisdell. This is 31st. This is Pillsbury. And these are three tall buildings. And they're called the Warren Towers. People from out of Minneapolis may not know them as the Warren Towers, but does this look familiar to you at all? Have you ever been in those buildings that you can remember?
No.
Okay. Let me ask you this. In 1993, okay, did you ever date anyone in Minneapolis?
No.
Okay. Did you ever, and I'm sorry I have to ask you this question, okay, I'm not trying to embarrass you, but did you ever have sex with a female in Minneapolis in 93 that you remember?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Okay. Does this lady look familiar to you at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, her name is Jeanie Childs.
Okay.
And she was also known as Jennifer. And so she is a person that lived in these buildings in 1993.
Okay.
And she was found in her building, in her apartment, deceased. Do you know anything about that at all?
No.
Okay, do you think you would have ever had sex with her?
I doubt it. No.
Okay.
I mean,
in 93, did you, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, but did you visit prostitutes at all?
not as far as, that's the year I met my wife.
Okay. Besides your wife, in 93, would you have been with a prostitute?
No, no.
Okay, would you have sex with another woman in 1993 other than your wife?
Yes.
Okay. Do you, I'm not asking their names, but do you remember the people you had sex with in 1993?
No. I mean, not off the top of my head, no.
Okay. But did any of the women live in Minneapolis?
No.
Okay. Then do you remember where you were living in 1993?
In Apple Valley.
Okay. Does Egan sound right? Would you have lived in Egan in 93? Could have been. The reason that we're talking is she was found deceased in her apartment, okay? And we think that you were inside that apartment. Would that be any reason for that at all to happen, you think?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now this is a long time ago. Are you sure on those answers?
I haven't. Yeah.
Okay.
And so when Karis Costas showed him the photos of the crime scene and of all those bloody items of evidence they had collected, he informed Jerry, well, that's kind of funny because your DNA is all over these items. Quote, there's got to be an explanation why scientifically you're there. It can't be a coincidence. Your DNA is on every one of these locations. I'm just kind of wondering, do you have any idea why that would be? And Jerry said no, he didn't. He didn't have any explanation because he had never been in that apartment, never had sex with Jeanie, didn't know who she was, and so he didn't know how his DNA could have ended up there. Mm-hmm. He could have no explanation for how his DNA would end up in her apartment if he had never been there. And he was just sort of, he was kind of cornered, guys. He was cornered. He had no explanation, as you'll see in, the footage that I've shown and the footage that I will show.
So part of what happened with this case, Jerry, is the investigators, what they did is they went through and they processed it. And as you can imagine, and I'm sure you're aware of, things are collected and then they're looked at for forever pretty much, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what happened in this case. And so I just want to show you just some stuff, nothing gory. But here's a bedspread. It's got a lot of red stuff on it. It's blood. Okay. Would there be any reason why your DNA would be on there? What about... what size shoe do you wear?
10 and a half, 11 and a half.
Okay. See these feet print there in the blood? Would those, any reason why those would be your feet print?
No.
Okay. And then you see this towel here with the blood on it? Would there be any reason why your DNA would be on that towel?
No.
Okay. So, you see this shirt and that washcloth? Okay, so this shirt is got a little bit of blood on it, and then this has got some blood on it. Would there be any reason why your DNA would be on those two items?
No.
Okay. What about this sink here? In this back area here, see all this blood? Would there be any reason why your DNA would be in that blood there?
No.
Okay. Does it shock you to know your DNA is there?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Back then, in '93, did you drink? Were you a drinker?
Yeah.
Could there have been a time in your life where you drank and maybe don't remember things?
It happens every once in a while.
Okay.
But
I mean, because we're trying to. I mean, let's try to figure this out here. Because do you remember us at all?
mm-mm.
Okay. Because this is. So what happened with this case, Jerry? This lady was killed, and these are the things that everyone looked at. And then, we started looking at this case 3 or 4 years ago, and just kind of processed it and did whatever. And your DNA is at every one of these locations that we talked about just a second ago. And I was kind of wondering, do you have any idea why that would be?
No.
Okay. Here's how I need you to understand is, a lot of times people come down here, okay? I mean, by the time that we work on cases, it has always been many years, and it is hard for people to get over the hurdle of kind of explaining things away. It's real important that if you remember anything here, to share that with us, because we want to make sure that if something happened in this apartment that you need us to know, that we know. Okay? Because there's got to be an explanation why scientifically you're there. Okay? It can't be a coincidence. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of times things have happened where people say, hey, all of a sudden something happened, or there's here, let me tell you what you don't know, or things along those lines. And I think it'd be a good idea for you to kind of get out in front of this a little bit and just kind of say, hey, hold on a second, guys. Let me tell you some parts that you don't know about this story. Science can tell us that the person that is at all these locations was there when this happened and participated in it. But there's the things that the person that was there can fill in gaps too. And that's what we're asking you for, are those gaps. Now, do you know we have your DNA?
I assume so.
Okay. So, can you think of anything? I mean, this has been a long time ago, but this is a pretty significant event. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, the person involved in this is going to remember, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what we're we're wondering if you have any of that kind of knowledge.
After his interrogation, Jerry was then taken for palm, fingerprint, and footprints. And on Thursday, February 14th, Jerry was officially charged with Jeannie's murder. They specifically charged him with second-degree murder with intent in Jeannie's murder at Hennepin County District Court. Now, Betty, Jeannie's mother, was, of course, ecstatic that her daughter's case was finally getting attention. There was finally some answers, Quote, "I am so happy they have come out with this new DNA technology so it can help other cases to be solved. My daughter was stabbed about 38 times, and no matter what went on in her life, she was my daughter, and I loved her." Cindy, Jeannie's sister, remember her younger half-sister, said despite the trauma, reliving this trauma that catching the killer, her sister's killer was, it was definitely worth it. Quote, "This has been very hard on our family, of course, but I have a very determined mom who always kept in contact with Minneapolis police. She refused to let Jeannie be forgotten and wanted some type of closure, as most parents would." Now, when Jerry was first arrested, a judge set his bail at $1 million. Jerry then hired defense attorney Steve Meshbesher to represent him, and Jerry's first court appearance on Friday, February 15th, Hennepin County District Court Judge Martha Holton Dimmick lowered Jerry's bail to $500,000. And this was after Meshbesher argued that not all the evidence had been examined or collected yet. His client had lived in Minnesota all his life. He was an active, participant in the local community, and he was not a flight risk. Quote, "What we've got is a very unsolved case, and it was charged, in my opinion, prematurely. I'm not going to try a case without the evidence in order to defend somebody."
You need to do the investigation first. Find out what the facts are, find out what the evidence is, and then determine the charge. Now they're charging it first. I'm not going to try a case and defend somebody without the evidence. I need to know the facts. That's how due process works. You don't go to trial and defend somebody willy-nilly, just on a whim. You need to know the facts in order to defend somebody.
And he argued that the defense was still waiting on a lot of pieces of evidence for them to examine. Jerry's wife, children, and 20 other supporters showed up in court to support him.
They came down here and supported him. They care about him. They believe in him.
And I just gotta say, man, as soon as I found out my husband was soliciting sex workers, I would have divorced his ass. That's cheating, So I don't know how or why she continued to be with Jerry, but she supported him even through this. And of course, Jeannie's family, including Betty and Cindy, were there. Now, originally prosecutors had wanted Jerry's bail only lowered to $750,000, but yeah, as I said, Meshbesher, was able to get it lowered to $500,000. Jerry made bail that night, and his next court date was then scheduled for March. And yeah, his wife stood by him, saying that the family had liquidated all of their assets and sold their 100-year family farm in order to get Jerry's bail and hire Meshbesher. Jerry was also fired from his job as a commodity broker. My lord, I can't talk. He was fired from his job as a commodity broker and a crop insurance agent after his initial court appearance. And get this, at his next court appearance on Wednesday, March 13th, Meshbesher successfully argued to lower Jerry's bail even further. It was further reduced to $250,000. Although Meshbesher had argued for $150,000, even as low as $75,000 with conditions. And, he told the court about, Jerry being fired from his job, that he had used his organic farm as collateral, to help pay for all these costs. And to hire a former Minneapolis police officer as a PI, Mike Sorrow, or maybe it's Sarrow. And he also was able to argue what he had before, right? Jerry was a lifelong resident, was active in the community, blah, blah, blah. And he told the court, quote, "He doesn't have much more money. He has never committed a violent crime in his whole life." He said that his client planned to, quote, "unequivocally proclaim his innocence in court." Though at this point in time, Jerry had not yet entered an official plea. Meshbesher also pushed back against that damning DNA evidence. And he was arguing about the fact that there were like two sources of DNA, considering what Jeannie's apartment was used for. That's kind of what he was trying to argue against, or I guess use for his argument, I guess I should say. And he pointed out, that there was like a mixture, right, of two or more persons' DNA found, saying, quote, "It could be 3, 4, or 5 people, whoever had sex with her, and that's probably a lot of men, isn't necessarily the person who committed the crime of the murder."
So even if there's a match, I'm not saying there is, but even if there's a match on the sperm, so what?
And, he was hinting, of course, that Jeannie's job as a sex worker may have been a factor in her death. Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Thad Tudor argued back against this and told the court that there were no other suspects, and that the single source DNA that they had found belonged to either Jerry or a paternal relative of his that they had traced via the Y chromosome. Judge Dinmick said that she was not going to consider Jeannie's profession as a sex worker as a factor in her case. And she pointed out, that many women are coerced or forced into sex work. And she said, quote, "I'm not going to condemn or consider that she had multiple partners." And she also noted that though she was sympathetic to Meshbesher's arguments, she also noted that 99% of the general population could be ruled out as contributors. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, dude. That's some damning evidence to push back against, right? And she pointed out, however, though 99% of the general population could be ruled out, neither Jeannie nor Jerry could. And that was significant. But nonetheless, she agreed to lower Jerry's bail. Meshbesher, after this hearing, told the press that he planned to conduct his own investigation and that the defense were going to hire their own DNA experts out of Idaho. And on June 25th, 2020, a grand jury indicted Jerry on first-degree murder. Yeah, first-degree premeditated murder. Remember, Jerry was charged and arrested for second-degree, but a grand jury indicted him on first-degree premeditated murder. And afterwards, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Remember, Jerry was out on bond at this time. And on Monday, June 29th, he turned himself in. Now, get this, guys. Elizabeth, still standing by her man, all right? She really took that song to heart. She wrote a letter to the court on July 8th, and I believe it was to argue in favor of Jerry continuing to be released out on bail. Now, the news report that I watched only showed the first page of the letter, so I will, of course, read it to you. And I couldn't find the rest of the letter. But yeah, I believe it was pretty much arguing for her husband to continue to be released on bail. So, she wrote, quote, "Your Honor, it has been more than 510 days since I was visited on the evening of February 11th, 2019, by Detective Karakostas and an FBI agent at our family home in Isanti, Minnesota. They arrived and reported that my husband, Jerry, was being detained in Hennepin County for a murder. They would not give me information about why they suspected him, stating that there was no known relationship, but did share the victim's name, that the murder happened on June 13th, 1993, and that there were many gruesome bloody pictures that they had shown him, and that Jerry had denied any knowledge of the murder. Detective Karakostas stated that my husband would call me that night, which he did not. The detective also promised that there would be lots of publicity and media attention, which he was correct about. The county attorney's office version of the story was plastered all over social media channels, national and international TV and print media, usually accompanied with a claim that they had solved a cold case with techniques that were used to catch the Golden State Killer, as the county attorney noted in his press conference about the matter on February 14th, 2019. As I stated previously, Jerry was picked up and detained in the afternoon hours of Monday, February 11th, 2019. The media exposure began the morning of February 12th, 2019, as he was being held. The county attorney exercised an extension to charge on February 13th, 2019, and the official complaint of second-degree murder was made by the county attorney on February 14th, 2019. Jerry was finally able to make his first court appearance on Friday, February 15th, 2019. I can say that, thankfully, none of our family has ever been in this type of position before, and we have had to learn as we go about the justice system as it relates to these charges. With the help of friends and family, we were able to liquidate all available assets, sadly including selling the century-old family farm which we had purchased from his parents, and get some loans to cover the cost of a bail bond for Jerry's release, and cost of legal counsel. While Jerry was being detained, and before he was officially charged, he was terminated from his job as a commodity broker and crop insurance agent, we suspect due to the extensive state and national publicity, and we have had to rely on my income from work at a nonprofit agency. In March 2019, you kindly ruled to lower the conditional bail amount, which allowed us to pay fees for necessary experts to get a fair trial under the conditions that were chosen by the court. Jerry has been faithful to the terms that were outlined for conditional bail, and there's no reason to expect this to change as we proceed through the judicial process. I am also reminded that in the United States of America, a person is considered innocent until proven guilty. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees every person equal protection under the law. I have known Jerry since May 28, 1993, when we met at weekend wedding events of mutual friends, and we have had nearly daily contact ever since, getting married exactly 1 year later. In fact, at the time we met, he was attending classes for his EMT certification and working another job. And I don't know what else the letter said. That was the only portion that the news report that I saw released. But Jerry did officially enter his plea of not guilty, and he was released on bail, although all the news reports said that his bail had been upped to $2 million. On July 24th, Jerry's trial date was then slated for April 19th, 2021. However, over the next 18 months, pretrial hearings were constantly pushed back, which of course pushed back the start of his trial. And a lot of the times that this was pushed back was because the defense said that they were still awaiting evidence and items that they were having examined to come back. Now, Meshbesher said that their defense was going to be that the cops had the wrong guy and that there were actually 5 other suspects who could have killed Jeanie, including Arthur Gray. And remember we mentioned this earlier, he had been violent with Jeanie in the past, and actually there were some hairs found in Jeanie's, I believe it was her left hand when she was found. And he pointed out that Arthur's hair wasn't really found anywhere else in the apartment, and he said that both of these factors linked Arthur directly to the crime. Quote, "It's plausible for a jury to believe that a victim of a violent murder may attempt to grab the perpetrator in self-defense, resulting in their hair being found in the victim's hands." Now, Jeanie's apartment had actually been leased in Arthur's name, and remember, like we said, it was believed that Jeanie primarily used that apartment for her work. So Arthur was definitely one of the suspects that Meshbesher was pointing the finger at. And just FYI, Arthur had actually passed away in 2017. He also pointed out that the BCA had found another man's bloodstains on the 21st floor of the building where Jeanie lived, as well as on the 18th floor. He said that the man who it belonged to worked near the apartment and later admitted to entering the building at one point in time. There was also a witness who we will get into later who described a man fitting his description, and she said she saw this man enter the apartment with Jeanie and later saw him running away. Another suspect that Meshbesher was going to try to argue was already a convicted killer. His name was James Lewis Carlton, and he was convicted of the 1994 murder of Jody Dover. And she had been found stabbed to death and naked in her Minneapolis apartment. Now, apparently, during the investigation, Karis Costas and Bokers did interview James behind bars, but he denied having any involvement in Jeanie's murder, telling them, "Look, man, I'm already serving life without parole." Quote, "If I did it, I'd tell you, okay?" Meshbesher then pointed the finger to a 4th suspect. This was a man who lived on the 20th floor of the Horn building, and apparently this man was in and out of the complex on the day of Jeanie's murder. The day after her murder, he was actually arrested for threatening 2 residents on the 21st floor with a 12-inch hunting knife. Meshbesher also pointed out that this man had been convicted of 3rd-degree felony sexual assault in 1980. And finally, Meshbesher said it could have been a 5th man. It was a man who had a scheduled appointment with Jeanie on the day of the murder. So those were the 5 suspects that Meshbesher was going to try and argue in court, right?
It's a brutal crime. I mean, there's no question it's a first-degree murder. They just have the wrong person.
On June 3rd, 2021, Meshbesher tried to get the DNA evidence that had been collected from the napkin, remember, that Jerry had at the hockey game, thrown out of court. He was claiming that it was unlawfully obtained and violated Jerry's constitutional rights to privacy. Now, as the judge took the matter under advisement, She requested that both sides waive the typical 30-day requirement that is needed in a ruling like this so that she could really, analyze the situation. And both sides agreed. And on October 4th of that year, Judge Dimmick ruled that the DNA evidence collected from the napkin was admissible. And this was because Jerry had thrown it in a public trash can at a public arena, and that the information gleaned from myheritage.com website was a publicly accessible website with a fee. And also pointing out that users voluntarily uploaded their DNA to it, right? Which I still don't know how to feel about that. It does kind of bother me that your DNA can then be traced and stuff when you haven't agreed to upload it. But yeah, as far as the napkin DNA, you're in a public place, you threw that away in a public trash can, everyone knows that, it's in public, you have no right to privacy, really. Or the expectation of privacy, I guess I should say. Jerry's trial was finally slated to start in August of 2022, except it would be held before Hennepin County Judge Juan G. Hoyos. Judge Dimmick had actually resigned her position, and this was so she could run for Hennepin County attorney. And one of the first things Judge Hoyos did was impose a gag order on the case, and this is after Meshbesher did a press interview, a news interview with a local news station. Judge Hoyos also prevented Meshbesher from bringing up the 5 possible suspects. Rather, he ruled that the only suspect that Meshbesher could bring up at trial was Arthur Gray. He couldn't bring up the other 4. And I'm not sure why. I just, thought that was interesting. And finally, on Tuesday, August 16th, 2022, Jerry's trial finally began.
Jerry, did you want to say anything about your defense?
Dr. Steve Meshbesher, if you have any comments, please, or questions.
The prosecution was led by Hennepin County prosecutors Darren Borg, Michael Radmer, and Mike Freeman. And they told the jury that the state had and would prove to them the 5 elements needed to convict someone of murder with intent. Borg recounted the crime scene, how it was a prolonged attack, a violent attack that moved from room to room. He pointed out that Jeanie had defensive wounds on her hand, so she clearly put up a fight, and she was stabbed 65 times. And he also pointed to that bloody footprint. Quote, "How do you get a bloody footprint? You step in liquid blood and you put your foot down. His footprints were in her blood because he killed her." In his opening statements, Radmer, again, kind of just reiterated just the gruesomeness and brutalness of the crime scene, but said in all of the viciousness that the perpetrator had left behind evidence. Quote, "A long investigation revealed it was Jerry Westrom who left behind his bloody footprint and DNA that day. It was he who murdered Jeanie Childs. Forensic evidence shows us who did it." He pointed to Jerry's DNA that was found on all of the items that we have discussed. And he pointed out that it was Jerry's footprint that matched the bloody footprint found at the crime scene. I mean, again, that's pretty hard evidence to fight against, right? Now, as far as Arthur being a suspect, Radmer pointed out, quote, "The hair creates a connection to the location, not the crime. It is of no surprise that a hair of Mr. Gray may end up on the hand of the victim while she struggled to fend off her attacker, given Mr. Gray lived at the location." The prosecution then called Betty, Jeannie's mother, to the stand, and she, I think, probably just reiterated, how she had last spoken to her daughter and stuff like that. And it is said when they showed the crime scene photos, particularly of Jeannie's body, Betty just couldn't handle it and she had to leave the courtroom. The prosecution then brought Maurice Hampton to the stand. Remember him? That was Arthur's buddy who said that they were out of state together. They brought him to the stand. And so Maurice recounted what he and Arthur did the weekend that Jeanie was murdered. So Maurice stated that he and Arthur had ridden their motorcycles to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that was to celebrate Harley-Davidson's 90th anniversary. He said that afterwards, they then rode their bikes to Chicago, Illinois, and then rode their bikes to Indiana, where they stayed at his mother's home. Maurice also stated that he didn't know Jeanie, had never met her, had never entered her apartment, and he maintained what he had since 1993, that him and Arthur were gone all weekend. Not to mention, his story would be pretty easy to prove, right? Meshbesher, who was assisted by defense attorney Andrew Tyler, tried, of course, right, to do what they're going to do, try to poke holes in the prosecution's case. And they did this by trying to discredit the prosecution's witnesses. highlighted what investigators didn't do, and again tried to point the finger at Arthur, again pointing out the hair as he had done in all of his pretrial motions. He stated, quote, "Memories fade, witnesses have died." He attacked the bloody footprint evidence along with the DNA evidence against Jerry, saying, quote, "Somebody sick, pathological murdered her. Westrom isn't the guy. Don't compound the tragedy by convicting an innocent person," pointing out that it was unknown how or when Jerry's DNA ended up in Jeannie's apartment. Okay. I mean, yeah, that would be a good defense if Jerry had admitted to, using Jeannie's services. But he was still maintaining, even at his trial, that he didn't know her, never had sex with her, never entered the apartment, or anything. Meshbesher also tried to argue that the crime scene was not properly secured. However, retired Minneapolis Police Sergeant Linda Reimenschneider, I think is how you say her name, testified that that was not true at all. She said she got to the crime scene a little before 7 p.m. and that the crime scene, Jeannie's apartment, had not been left unattended. Corey Busker, remember the security guard? He had stayed outside Jeannie's door to ensure that that didn't happen, that no one entered and that the crime scene wouldn't be contaminated. Reimenschneider, God, I hope that's right, said that when she got there, the crime scene was extremely brutal, that there was bloody water all over the floor due to the shower being left on. She had seen Jeannie's body, describing it as bloody and battered, and she said, quote, "The only thing she was wearing was dirty socks." Another police sergeant who had entered the crime scene, Robert Krebs, he testified that he actually recognized Jeannie when he got to the crime scene. Quote, "She looked familiar to me." He looked through a fountain pack that was at the crime scene and saw Jeannie's ID. And after seeing the ID and the name, he was able to place her. Quote, "I recognized her as a person I knew from past contact, and that he had, quote, over the years bumped into her on the street." He said on one of those occasions in 1979, Jeannie had a different name, and he cited her as he was making another arrest at a supposed health club that was known for sex work that was located on East Lake Street. He said Jeannie was, quote, very matter-of-fact of what she was doing there. Now, the defense only called 2 witnesses, one of which was a woman named Bonita Bonnie Reed. And her mother actually lived at the Horn Towers at the time of the murder. So remember when Meshbesher said that he had a witness that would describe someone who entered the building with Jeannie? This was her. So apparently back on June 21st, 1993, Detective Solotros, who was the original lead investigator on the case, did interview Bonnie. And on June 10th, 2019, in their investigation, both Karis Costas and Bokers had also interviewed her. She testified that she remembered seeing Jeannie enter the building with a tall blonde man in a trench coat on the day of the murder. She said the 2 were getting on an elevator when she saw them, and the man was carrying a 12-pack of beer. She testified that about an hour after that, she saw the same man without a trench coat running out of the stairwell. However, when Bokers was called to testify, Karis Costas had actually passed away at this time, so only Bokers was the investigator that testified at the trial. He stated that when she was interviewed twice by police at the time of the murder, she never mentioned any of this. Quote, "She hadn't mentioned that in either of the previous 2 contacts with the police department. The reports from 1993 made no mention of that person or a person fitting that description." And I was unclear if she repeated this version of events with Karis Costas and Bokers. Now, apparently the timing of when Bonnie allegedly saw Jeannie with this man in the trench coat varied as well. In one interview, she said she saw Jeannie in the evening, and in another interview that was more recent, she said it was earlier in the day. Boker also testified that when he and Karis Costas had looked into the case, they had also found files on Jeannie's electronic Rolodex, and they had found the name Jerry. There's just the name Jerry, and there was a corresponding phone number to it. But probably because it had been so long, police were unable to trace that phone number. Meshbesher's only other witness he called was Sergeant Moe. Remember 2012, she had, looked at Jeannie's case and submitted those pieces of evidence. And she testified that some of the pieces of evidence in the case were inadvertently placed in the wrong file, but she had corrected that. Now, Sergeant Moe did not join the police force until 1996, and she guessed that she first looked into Jeannie's case at about 2010. Because remember, one of the things Meshbesher was trying to poke at was the things investigators didn't do, right? Like the mishandling of the case. And he asked her about the significance of Arthur's hairs being found in Jeanie's hand. However, under cross-examination by Borg, she did concede that if a DNA profile was consistent with other items throughout the crime scene, that was also significant, especially since Arthur lived there. During his closing arguments, Borg urged the jury, who could either convict Jerry of second-degree murder or first-degree murder, to find him guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder, saying, quote, "What else are you intending to do to another human being when you cut, stab, and slice them 65 times? And on Thursday, August 25th, after only 2 hours of deliberations, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. They convicted Jerry, who was now 56 years old, of both first-degree and second-degree murder. Apparently, the only question they had asked the judge was, quote, "If we find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, do we also fill out a form for second-degree murder?" Yeah, it was not good. 2 hours. 2 hours, guys. Meshbesher announced that they were going to appeal directly to the Minnesota State Supreme Court, which under state law is allowed under first-degree murder charges. Or I guess I should say convictions. He told the court, quote, "Very disappointed. The jury did not see all the evidence. We had presented all the evidence. The judge said no. Whatever happened was brutal. It's a question of who did it. As we said in the beginning, and we're saying now, you've got the wrong guy. We are sorry for the loss of Jeanie Childs' life. We're looking forward to Jerry Westrom's exoneration from the Minnesota Supreme Court."
It's a question of who did it, but we were not allowed to present who did it. She was a practicing prostitute. Out of that unit, Arthur Gray was her pimp, and Arthur Gray was not above doing something like this in order to confine her behavior as a prostitute.
As we said in the beginning, and we're saying now, you've got the wrong guy. We are sorry for the loss of Jeanie Childs' life. We're looking forward to Jerry Westrom's exoneration from the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Freeman just said that he hoped the conviction could at least bring some sort of sense of, closure or peace to Jeanie's family, saying, quote, "They have had to live without justice for her brutal murder for nearly 3 decades. Today's guilty verdicts show that we will pursue convictions for serious crimes, even if it takes years to gather evidence." Betty was, of course, thrilled, right? She had waited almost 30 years for answers in her daughter's brutal murder, right? And she just said, quote, "I know that the law is finally going to take care of him for what he did, and I hope he can sleep at night. Jeanie was a wonderful person. Even though she had problems, she had a big heart."
I'm happy, and I know that Jeanie will always be in my heart. She was always afraid I was going to try and investigate on things because I never let anything sit. And I'm happy now that he's going to get his justice. I just feel bad that his kids got to go through this too. And the worst part is that when my daughter was murdered, I was doing home care. I was doing hospice. And that's when I found out my daughter was dead, is that I saw on the news the building that she lived in. And here she was, they were carrying my daughter's body out. I didn't even know until I called the coroner's office and found out that it was her. And it has not been life very good since. I miss her. She's supposed to be there for me when I get old, and she won't be. So all I gotta say, honey, is that justice been served, and I'm happy about that.
Afterwards, one of the local news stations had an interview with one of the jurors. It was actually the jury foreman. His name was Derek Fradenberg, and he said to the jury there was almost no doubt instantaneously that Jerry was the murderer. Quote, "It's a story. It's fascinating. It's undeniable that he was in that apartment, and the footprints place him in the apartment at the time of Jeanie Childs' death." He said the fact that the police had used the napkin to trace it all the way to Jerry and how they had done that was really compelling for them. Quote, "Listening to that testimony in court, it's incredibly gripping stuff. For that to be the thing that brought him down, I guess is really just incredible."
Listening to that testimony in court, it's incredibly gripping stuff. For that to be the thing that
brought him down, I guess, is really just incredible.
He said, yeah, Jerry's guilt was almost unanimous throughout the whole jury as soon as they got behind closed doors. And he said, quote, "Sure, there will always be questions because no one saw this crime happen, but at the end of the day, the evidence against the defendant is so overwhelming. He's just a guy who didn't have a whole lot to say, but what he had to say, I know they were lies."
Just a guy who didn't have a whole lot to say, but what he had to say, I know they were lies.
He added, quote, "He would have had to chase her around the apartment, stabbing her multiple times over and over again. He really wanted her to die. That's why it matters that this came up 30 years later. It was so brutal, it's so graphic, you can't just let this go. Even the most charitable reading is that one of the footprints was for sure his. It's not a shoe impression or anything like that. It's his bare foot, and our feet have the same sort of ridges and whorls and everything that our palms and fingers do."
He would have had to chase her around the apartment, stabbing her multiple times over and over again. He really wanted her to die. That's why it matters that this came up 30 years later. It was so brutal, it's so graphic. You can't just let this go. Even the most charitable reading is that one of the footprints was for sure his. It's not a shoe impression or anything like that. It's his bare footprint. And our feet have the same sort of ridges and whorls and everything that our palms and fingers do.
He said that the three things that really sealed Jerry's guilt for the jury were the bloody footprints, Jerry's interrogation video, and the fact that police had located his DNA all over Jeannie's apartment. Quote, "Yeah, those three things. He said he wasn't there. His DNA proves that he was there. His footprint puts him there at the time of the murder."
Is that what it boiled down to, was the police interview, the DNA, and the bloody footprint?
Yeah, those three things. He said he wasn't there. His DNA proves that he was there. His foot puts him there. His footprint puts him there at the time of the murder.
The local CBS affiliate, WCCO, they were also the ones who interviewed Derek. They also interviewed two of the three alternate jurors. Their names were Mon Tay and Dean Zimmerman, and they both said that they too would have found Jerry guilty of murder. Quote, "In the deliberation room, I was going to find him guilty of first-degree murder for the case because of all the evidence. He said he was never there, but then they had his semen there, his blood and footprints all in the apartment, and this was according to Monu." While Dean said that he would for sure have found Jerry guilty, he probably would have found him guilty of second-degree murder because he didn't think Jerry went to Jeannie's apartment with the intent to kill her. Quote, "The evidence, I think, was very clear that he was there. He made the footprints at the time she was murdered. It's just too hard to argue with that. This looked like it was a crime of anger, and something happened during their encounter together there that somehow set him off. He just lost it." What do you guys think of that? I think Dean has certainly a point, because, yeah, it's such a brutal stabbing, and clearly it was like a fight. And Jerry's had a history of soliciting sex workers, and, from what I could gather, what we know, he doesn't have a history of being violent with them. So I really wonder, if something happened that just made him snap. I don't know. And on Friday, September 9th, Jerry was sentenced to the automatic life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Jeannie's family and supporters were there at the sentencing wearing shirts. I believe they were pink shirts, from what I remember. And they all proclaimed, quote, "We got justice for Jeannie." In her victim impact statement, Betty talked about the last time she spoke with her daughter. Her daughter had, I believe she said it was like an abscessed tooth. She had some sort of tooth problem, and she was urging her to get it fixed. Quote, "I never thought for one second that was the last time I'd ever talk with her and say goodbye. I've waited so many years to have this end, and it's put my life through so much hell. I'll never forget and will love her the way I always did."
I talked to Jeannie the weekend that she was murdered. She had called me on a Friday and said she had an abscessed tooth, and what could she do? I wanted to go there and get her, bring her home. She said, "Don't worry, I'll be okay." And I told her to go to the clinic and get some medication for pain. I talked to her Saturday. She was still alone. And, excuse me. And I never thought for 1 second that was the last time I would ever talk with her and say goodbye. I've waited so many years to have this end, And it's put my life through so much hell. And I just really feel I'll never forget and love her the way I always did. And I feel bad for my family and other families that are going to have to go through all of the process now of suffering over this. Something that should have never happened. And I think that's all I have to say, Your Honor.
Jeannie's niece, who was only 9 years old, so Cindy's daughter, her name was Melissa Ann Beaulieu. I think I said that right. It was hard to hear how her name was pronounced in the video, but she spoke about how close she was with her aunt, how loving and protective she was. She said, quote, "She made the world a better place. She was brave, silly, loving, and kind. On June 13th, 1993, my parents sat me down and had to tell me something that would change my life forever. It flipped my world right on its head. From looking at the world through my freshly 9-year-old eyes with hope and thinking it was a good place out here, the world was suddenly a dark and scary place. I remember the knot in my stomach, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I remember her laying in her casket and begging her, please wake up. The effect something like this creates can be vicious. It can affect you for an entire lifetime. To lose someone you love is a profound experience."
Please proceed when you're ready.
To say I miss her isn't quite enough. The French term for I miss you is tu me manques. Tu me manques. You are missing from me. And since June 13th, 1993, she has in fact been missing from me. The bond between aunties and nieces are unlike any other that we experience in our lives. I just turned 9 years old. 7 days prior, had just seen and spoken to her. The world is a pretty small place for a 9-year-old kid, and it consists of people who are in your life regularly and consistently. My Auntie Jeanie made up a large percentage of that world. No, that one's goodbye. Thank you. Regardless of all that she had been through in this life, she did not let the world make her bitter. She had a smile that could light up a room, a laugh that no matter what mood you were in, would curl up the corners of your mouth, and before you knew it, you were smiling. She made a huge impact in my life. She made the world a better place. She was brave, silly, loving, and kind. She separated her eyelashes with a safety pin. Gave the best hugs, and not those half-hearted, one-arm, partial effort hugs. You knew you were loved when she wrapped her arms around you. She was one of my first lessons. She taught me some of my first lessons on what unconditional love is and what it looked like. My last memories of her are sticking up for me when a friend had made me feel badly. She put me on her lap, and we had a talk. At the time, I was unaware, but it was one of the last ones we'd ever have. She would move mountains and break my heart. I knew that not due to her words, but the look in her eyes. She loved little kids, and she loved older folks, and would go out of her way to help either. On June 13th, 1993, my parents sat me down and had to tell me something that changed my life forever. It flipped my world right on its head. From looking at the world with my freshly 9-year-old eyes, with hope and, thinking that it was a good place out there, the world suddenly was a darker, scarier place. I remember the knot in my stomach, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. And I remember her laying in her casket, and me begging her to please just wake up. The effects something like this creates can be vicious. They affect you for an entire lifetime. To lose someone you love is a profound experience. The personal effects that I have are no contest to what I watched my family go through, especially my grandmother. She went for years to try and find answers, try and find peace from it. Her loss has left us all with a gaping hole in our lives that can't be filled. I thank you for the opportunity to speak and let you know a little bit about my aunt.
Your Honor, the final victim impact statement is the statement of Miss Cindy Kosnich. That'll be read into the record by Miss Zimmerman, the advocate from the County Attorney's Office.
Oh, thank you. So please go ahead.
I am so sorry we never got the chance to say goodbye. You were my big sister and my only sister. For those of us you left behind, we miss you so, so much. You were the one I knew, no matter what, would be there to back me, cry with me, hug me, or just an ear to listen with no judgment. Your life was taken way too soon by a callous decision from one person. Because of this decision, my children grew up never knowing their Auntie Jeanie. Your death has forever changed our lives. The life we had before no longer exists. My sister was not perfect. She did make her share of mistakes. Jeanie has a family that loved her very much. I remember my mother many times wandering the streets of Minneapolis, knocking on doors, walking in some dark alleys, putting herself in harm's way to find and bring her daughter home. It seemed no matter what she tried, my mom was just not able to keep her home. Jeanie was never able to have children of her own. So when she met and married Al Childs, she was so excited to have children to be a mom to. She truly loved those kids. After Jeanie and Al split up, my sister stayed in those kids' lives and made sure they had what they needed. Jeanie had a huge heart, as well as a true gift with elderly people. June 1993, our lives were forever changed. I sat in the courtroom, listening, and seeing the details of what my sister went through. This has forever changed me. The last and final thing I would like to talk about is the sadness I have been carrying around for the Westrom family. I cannot help but to feel so, so bad for his wife and children. They were all innocent in this tragic mess. Think about how his wife must be feeling, as well as the devastation his children are going through. I want them to know this too really breaks my heart. His daughter will never have her father to walk her down the aisle on her wedding day. Their children will never get the chance to know their grandfather. It's important that any way you look at this tragic ending of my sister's life, you remember no one wins. Thank you.
And yeah, as you could see from that video, her impact statement was really hard to watch. Like she was so affected. As they had been throughout the whole trial, Jerry's wife, children, and supporters had been there and still stood by him. And when he was handing down the sentence, Judge Hoyos did acknowledge how there was pain on both sides of this, right? Quote, "It seems like you have led a very positive life for the last 29 years. Your wife and family have been here. You clearly have a lot of support. I'm well aware that this case has not just affected your life, but theirs too. However, you took Jeanie Childs' opportunity of a life. She was not able to continue to be with her family, to provide her love to her family, and she was deprived of receiving that love. You took that away from her 29 years ago, and now the law demands you face our state's most serious consequences."
Well, I've seen two families throughout this case, throughout this trial, and that are experiencing a lot of pain and anguish. And I've seen your family with Ms. Westrom. They've been here every day supporting you. And it seems like you have led a very positive life for the last 29 years. And your wife and family have been here, and you clearly have a lot of support, and they love you. And it tells me that you touched their lives in a very positive way. And I'm well aware that this case doesn't just affect your life, but theirs too. However, you took Jeanie Childs' opportunity of a life. She was not able to continue to be with her family, to provide her love to her family, and she was deprived of receiving that love. You took that away from her 29 years ago. And now the law demands that you face our state's most serious consequence. And at this time, the court is going to impose the following sentence. You, Jerry Arnold Westrom, having been convicted by a Hennepin County jury of first-degree murder as to count 1, you're hereby committed to the Commission of Corrections for a term of life, pursuant to Minnesota Statute 609-185, the statute in effect in June of 1993.
Additionally, Jerry was given credit for 39 days served and had to pay $3,600 in restitution. Now, as promised, Meshbesher appealed the conviction to the Minnesota State Supreme Court, and he did this on November 28th, claiming that Jerry's first trial had ineffective counsel, which that confused me a little bit because, don't they usually get another lawyer to argue that? But the paper said it was Meshbesher who filed that, so whatever. There was prosecutorial misconduct and insufficient evidence. Insufficient evidence, really? And on Monday, December 11th, 2023, the Minnesota State Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Betty said that despite any of Jerry's appeals, that the case for her was solved and she had closure. Quote, "He's going to try fighting for as long as he can, but as far as I'm concerned, the case is closed."
He does not want to lose. He is going to try fighting as long as he can, but as far as I'm concerned, the case is closed.
And on May 8th, 2024, the state Supreme Court rejected all of Jerry's arguments, and they reaffirmed his first-degree murder charge, but took away the second-degree murder charge, saying that, you can't be convicted of both, it's one or the other. And their decision was formally entered into the record on June 11th, 2024. And in early September of that same year, Meshbesher tried to then appeal the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. But on Monday, October 21st, again of 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the case. And Jerry is currently serving his time at the St. Cloud Prison in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And that, my dears, was the cold case murder of Jeanie Childs. Can you imagine waiting nearly 30 years? Waited nearly 30 years for a conviction. And okay, come on, Jerry obviously did it, right? Come on, dude, you've got fucking blood. You've got fucking footprints and DNA and sperm and all that. And in the interrogation, if Jerry had at least admitted, right, to sleeping with Jeanie, being there or something, right, then you could at least argue, there's some, there's some reasonable doubt there, maybe he was just a client, but he straight up denied ever being in the apartment, ever knowing Jeanie, ever having sex with her, ever, anything. And it's bro, come on. They've got him dead to rights. And I can't believe that his wife has still stuck by him. I don't know. I don't know how you could, but I guess there's a lot that spouses can hide from each other. But how did he hide all of those sex worker solicitation charges? You know what I'm saying? I find that out? Nah, I'm gone. I don't know. But yeah, at least Jeanie's family was able to get some closure. And yeah, good for once. Good on the police for continuing to work a case, even though the victim was a sex worker. And still to this day, even in 2025, people view sex workers as lesser than. And they're not, dude. Sex work is work. You know what I'm saying? And it's certainly more admirable than some jobs like CEO. And yeah, I'm sorry, but she deserved justice just like anyone else. And I'm really glad that they were able to get it. Fuck Jerry. He's a piece of shit. He's disgusting. God knows what else is in his past. Dude, buying 16-year-olds liquor and only hiring teenage girls. Come on, dude. Gross. Well, I guess that will do it for this week for Crime Dive. Next week will be another Crime Dip. If you remember, that's just where I kind of just share a case that doesn't have a lot of information. So those are usually quicker videos. And then in 2 weeks, we will be back with another Crime Dive. And I've got a few to choose, but I think I'm going to do another two-parter. It's another one that took a long time to solve. And that was a rabbit hole that I didn't think was going to be a whole lot of information. It was originally going to be a crime dip story like this one. But man, it just got a lot of coverage and there was just a lot to unpack. So we will be back in 2 weeks with that. And until I see you again, I hope you certainly take care of yourself out there. Do the best you can. It's really shitty in the corporate states of America right now, so do the best you can. Try not to be a dick, except to dicks that deserve it. And yeah, I will see you either next Wednesday for Crime Dip or in 2 weeks for another Crime Dive. Bye-bye.